now. And so we want to welcome everybody to our, what I believe is our first chamber speaker series of the year in September. So we're just starting the year off 8-9 months late, something along those lines, and doing it in a virtual capacity, which is a first for us as well. So I want to thank, I've got to say thank you right now to Jen and Morgan, who are on your screen as well, for helping set this up. In my 14 years of chamber work, which the anniversary was last week, hard to believe, I've never had the opportunity to have both members of our congressional delegation at one time. So in all the years, because Rick, I think, has been there the entire time. So all the years we've ever tried to schedule this, this is a first. So I'm super happy and thankful that we're here. And so I want to first and foremost say thank you to our sponsor of the Chamber Speaker Series. The entire series for 2020 and all the fun that it's been is BP Cherry Point. And so Pam, I'm going to toss it over to you to kick us off for about 3 minutes.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Guy. And hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having BP sponsor this Chamber Speaker Series today. And, you know, it's our privilege to be a part of this great organization and to support this kind of activity where we come together as a community and hear from our leaders in the community, come together with each other and talk about business or talk about life, and it's a privilege to be a part of it. So, you know, I represent BP Cherry Point Refinery. We're 49 years old at BP Cherry Point, going on our 50th birthday next year. It'll be a big year for us, but 2020 was a big year for us, or has been a big year for us so far. We have a new CEO within BP, Bernard Looney, and he has announced a very bold ambition for our company. And I just wanted to share with you a few highlights of this ambition, and I know that you'll probably hear a lot more about it in the weeks and months to come. But BP, I think, is recognizing that there's a huge societal shift in how people will demand their energy in the future. And we are now, you know, pleased to consider ourselves an international energy or integrated energy company from an international oil company. We've sort of rebranded ourselves, and that's really in recognition of the fact that the world is going to be requiring energy in lots of different ways than it does today in the future. We've set out some really bold ambitions. There are 10 of them, but I won't tell you all of them right now, but I will tell you a few. And the first few are really big. Our number one aim is to be a net zero company across our entire operations by 2050 or sooner. And that's a big goal and a big ambition, and we'll be working on it for a long time, but 2050 is not that far away. And recently we have announced some of our targets along the way that I know will be of interest to a lot of folks. We are going to be scaling up our renewables investment. Our low carbon investments will increase by 10 times over what they are now. So we've been investing about $500 million a year, and we're going to change that to about $5 billion over a 10-year period. So $5 billion by 2030. And then eightfold by that by 2025. So we're really going to be amping up what we do invest in low carbon. And that's not to say that we aren't going to also be investing in oil and gas, because we will, but we're making that commitment to the world to be finding new solutions for energy and helping to lead the transition. And then over time, we have also discussed how we'll be scaling down our oil and gas operations by about 1 million barrels a day by 2030. And so that would be overall a reduction of about 40% in our oil and gas. Some reductions will be in refining as well as part of that. But we'll be bringing on new renewables. We've committed to developing 50 gigawatts of renewable energy as well by 2030. So there's big changes afoot in BP, and I would just welcome all of you to stay attuned. And I would love to, you know, share more details with anyone who would like to know more about how BP is pivoting and changing into the future. But we have made it our ambition to really change the nature of the company and grow our investment in renewables so that we can deliver a cleaner energy to the world and to all of you. So with that, thank you again, Guy. We appreciate it. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our members of Congress. Thank you both for, I know how extraordinarily busy you are, but we appreciate all you do, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Pam, for being a sponsor of the speaker series, as well as for everything that you do for our community. And per what we talked about, I'm going to move you into the attendee list now. And so thanks for being a sponsor, and thanks for being here. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce, first up, Congresswoman Susan Delbine, and I will let you introduce Morgan because I think it's important that everyone understand who Morgan is and who Jen is. So, Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks. It's great to be here with everyone, and I appreciate the time. Morgan Dykeman, who is also here, is my liaison to Skagit and Whatcom counties, and so many of you have seen her around, and she is our contact when people have issues or questions. So it's great to have Morgan here too. You know, I know this is an incredibly difficult time for everyone, and especially in Whatcom County, given the border closure. We all want to do everything possible to limit the spread of COVID-19, and that's the biggest tool we have, is to do everything we can to limit that spread. But the closing of the U.S. Canadian border has had a very significant impact on our border economy. In 2018, nearly 7 million trips were made into Whatcom County by visitors from Canada, and approximately a quarter of those visitors came specifically for shopping, and they spent about $138 million at local businesses. So crossings from Canada into Whatcom County are down 98% from their 2018 numbers, and cross-border shopping travel is basically non-existent. So recently, myself, along with Congressman Larson and our senators, Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell, sent a letter to our ambassador to Canada asking for this to be a priority, for the two countries to work together to find a solution to the issue that we're all facing, and to look at a phased reopening. I say that specifically because we want the transparency and understanding about what it will take and how a border reopening might happen. I think that information will be incredibly helpful, so we can all track and have a better understanding, and also for the business community and others to plan. We also have spent a lot of time, we talk about the unique issues of Point Roberts, and that's a separate area we're continuing to work on, given how challenging their physical location is in terms of having access to the rest of the county. Back in May, the House passed the HEROES Act, which really also is incredibly important to providing ongoing support for our communities, support for state, local, and tribal governments for essential services like public health. It would strengthen business programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, extend unemployment benefits, which have been so critical to help families get by through this pandemic. And it also helped keep workers on the payroll. So the last piece of that I want to talk about briefly is the jobs credit, which is called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. It was originally started in the CARES Act and is part of the HEROES Act that we passed in the House. We would expand it in the HEROES Act, and that expansion would help keep nearly 60 million workers on the payroll with their businesses and connected to their benefits. It would cover up to 80% of $45,000 in qualified wages per employee for the rest of the year. Wages include salary and health benefits. The program's phased in so that if a business has seen at least a 10% decline in revenue, they're eligible to receive a partial credit, and then it goes up from there. It really is a simple program so that you basically have the resources to keep people on the payroll through the end of the year, something that would be directly with the IRS. And it's a very bipartisan program, so we're hopeful that we can continue to push to get that through. It would work with the Paycheck Protection Program and other SBA COVID relief loans, so that you could, if you use PPP, then you could use the Employee Retention Tax Credit after you were done with those funds. So something very important I know is critical, but we're still in negotiations on a next package, and waiting on the Senate to act. And we stand ready to move as quickly as possible because we know time is of the essence here. So thanks again for having me. Look forward to the ongoing conversation. And I'll turn it back to you, Guy.
Thank you so much. Next up, we would love to hear from Congressman Rick Larson. And just to let everyone know, is we did accept questions in advance, and so we'll get to that once we hear from both of you. But if you have questions right now as an attendee, just please use the Q&A feature. As Ray mentioned, yes, I do need some better hold music, and we'll work on it next time. So without further ado, Congressman Rick Larson.
Thanks, Guy. You're finding more out about what it's like to be in your position or be in a leadership position. Hold music is the most important issue facing the Bellingham Whatcom Chamber of Commerce. So
it's our first Q&A question, Rick. It was I gotta mean something, right?
Yeah, that's right. Before I start, I want to thank Susan Delbine and her leadership on the Point Roberts situation. Having once represented Point Roberts, I certainly have a real understanding of the concerns I was during 2001. After September 11th, 2001, had our own set of issues. And Susan's taken leadership on this, being her district, but stand ready to support the folks in Point Roberts and you all in Whatcom County with regards to reopening the border. Now the Canadians have something to say about that. So it's obviously an international issue. It's not just a local issue. And patience is always a virtue, but hardly something that we want to practice right now, given the state of the economy and where we want to go. Also, before I begin, I just want to briefly comment on the state of the U.S. and just, the recent and tragic violence against Black Americans in the U.S. continues to haunt me a little bit. It's really challenged me to listen more. It's challenged me to learn more about the systemic racism that does in fact exist in the United States. And some of that is so baked in, we don't see it sometimes. But we are seeing it during the pandemic, just in terms of how COVID-19 has impacted people of color from a healthcare perspective and from the impact of the economic downturn. A lot of that exists because of long-time inequities that exist in the United States. So when I think of Jacob Blake or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery and many others who have been killed due to police violence, I'm trying to think of what we can do more to address systemic racism, and I hope we can all learn from that. We did pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act out of the House of Representatives in July, and I would call on the Senate to take that bill up and vote on it as well. Getting to the issue at hand, and why we're called here today, Jen Rogers is on the call. She's works for me and does outreach into Skagit, Whatcom, and San Juan Islands for me, and is more than likely the person you all would end up talking to in an immediate sense if you had an issue. But just a couple of points of review on the CARES Act. We had PPP loans that came out, and we've counted 8,500, more than 8,500 businesses in the second congressional district, and as well as nonprofits that have received PPP loans. That includes about 430 in the portion of the Whatcom County that I represent. And in total of the 8,500 businesses, it saved about 60,000, a little over 60,000 jobs. So that was an immediate impact of the CARES Act. I recently visited some small businesses and nonprofits in Whatcom County that received PPP loans, like Whatcom Habitat for Humanity, the Mount Baker ski area. I went to their offices in Bellingham, not out to the ski area. Keith Cox Audubon as well, and Aslan Brewing Depot. So I wanted to thank them for the opportunity to go visit with them, and thank the local lenders who helped make the PPP a success for folks. There may be more we can do. And if we do have a negotiated solution on the HEROES Act, Susan and I are both on a 24-hour leash to fly back to Washington, D.C. For votes if that comes into play. And I would note it may look like, let me say that negotiations aren't going well, but that doesn't mean negotiations aren't going. So I think even I heard today, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin testified in front of the bipartisan coronavirus oversight committee, the CARES Act oversight committee, and laid out in broad strokes the administration's position on the next stage of relief. So there is talking going on. Obviously, talking has to turn into doing, but that is important. The U.S. Postal Service, I want to make a note here for everyone, is not a luxury. It is a necessity. We rely on the Postal Service for a lot of things. One of the things is 80% of VA veterans prescriptions are sent through the Postal Service. 1.2 billion prescriptions were sent through the Postal Service in 2019. 146.2 billion pieces of mail were delivered to 160 million addresses in 2019. And I know Susan has too, I've heard from small businesses in my district who rely on the USPS as that business's logistics service. So it is not, we should not be toying around with saving the Postal Service, ensuring that it can deliver mail on time, not just election mail, which is important because the foundation of a democratic republic is our ability to vote, but also because of small business and the delays in small business growth that could happen if USPS isn't operating fully. So that's important. And then finally, I'll just note on transportation and economic development. I just think that we need to start thinking right now about what recovery looks like after COVID-19. And I think an infrastructure investment based recovery ought to be part of COVID-19 recovery. We passed the Invest in America Act out of the U.S. House of Representatives, sent it over to the Senate, a call in the Senate to act on that. It's a $1.5 trillion multi-year bill that invests in our roads, our bridges, our highways, our transit. It has an element in there for rural broadband expansion. It has elements in there for affordable housing expansion. Think of the Bellingham Housing Authority. Think of down here in Snohomish County, Housing Hope is a big nonprofit affordable housing developer. So this can be part of a recovery package moving forward, and we need to, in my view, act on that. And I'm also working, I would note, for mid-sized cities to have a better opportunity to access these federal dollars. The biggest city I have in my Whatcom portion is Bellingham. Susan has the rest of it, but cities like Ferndale and Linden are cities that would be eligible if we were able to get language that I want in the transportation bill to better focus federal dollars on mid-sized cities. And so I'm focused on that. I look forward to your questions. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. There's a lot of work. There's a lot on our respective desks that we have to work with on a national level, but certainly I think I can speak for Susan when I say we're always thinking locally, what can we do to help out, because you're the folks who are our constituents and you come first, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. So I'm just going to jump straight into the questions. We had a couple that were in advance, and so we're going to start with those. First one being with regards to Point Roberts. And so we learned that Canadian border adjacent to the northwest angle, Minnesota, allows residents to transit through Canada to the U.S. simply by showing their driver's license as proof of residency. Both of you have been advised of this allowance. What progress has been made in getting border restrictions relaxed for residents of Point Roberts, Washington, similar to those enjoyed by residents of Northwest Angle in Minnesota?
Let me take that one.
Susan's got to go first.
We just sent a letter, myself and Colin Peterson, who represents Northwest Angle. We just sent a letter asking the Canadian government to make special exceptions for these communities. So the Northwest Angle is also having struggles, which is why we sent this letter together. And literally just went out. There's also a community in Alaska that is not kind of the same exclave like Northwest Angle and Point Roberts, where they are physically attached to the Canadian mainland, but there's only a road in from Canada there. There have been some different way of handling that has been in place. So we want to use those as an example to see changes in place for Point Roberts to help it out. I mean, one of the biggest issues right now is that children who go to school in Canada aren't able to go to school. They won't let them in. We've had some students switch to go to school in Blaine because it's all remote learning right now. But for these families, this is a huge change, and we don't have cases in Point Roberts right now. So making sure that we can absolutely do everything to keep people safe, but also to put policies in place to help this very unique community is important. I appreciate the work the county has done to get a ferry. The port has done to get a ferry up to Point Roberts, and they're increasing that to twice a week when I was talking to folks at the end of last week. That's important, but really we're going to continue to work with the Canadian government to get a clear reopening plan for the entire northern border, but also to make sure that we have policies to really address the unique situation of Point Roberts and Northwest Angle.
Mm-hmm. So just to
go ahead, Guy.
No, so just a point of clarification, the Northwest Angle is not treated special.
Well, Colin Peterson, who's the representative there, actually co-authored the letter that we just sent because they're having similar struggles there to ask for the Canadian government to help both of our communities, both mine in Point Roberts and his in Northwest Angle.
Rick?
Yeah, and it's not the same situation either. They're all different. Even the Alaskan situation is different. So they're all different. And certainly we want to take into account, but the same solution in Point Roberts wouldn't be a Northwest Angle solution. In Colin Peterson's description to me about the issue there's a lot of Minnesotans on the US side who have cabins on the other side of the lake that's in Canada. So a lot of it's just boat transit. There may be some other transit, but a lot of it's just boat transit, but still it's about people trying to get to their summer cabins to go fishing and hunting and such. So it's not exactly the same. Not that there aren't lessons. I'm not suggesting that. And Sandy's glad to hear from Sandy, a former tourism bureau head down here in Snohomish County. Appreciate that. But it is different, and I think treating them for their unique situations can be important and probably help us get to a solution sooner.
And even though that solution may be similar, it's important to acknowledge that it's very different. Next up, and this was the other question that we received in advance, and it's regarding lumber prices and shortages. So I'll go ahead and just read the question in full. In recent months, U.S. home builders have experienced a dramatic increase in lumber prices as strong demand exceeds supply. Since mid-April, prices have increased more than 130%. As a result, the price of the average new single-family home has risen more than $16,000, and the price of an average new multifamily unit has gone up over $6,000. Housing's been a bright spot during the pandemic, and the industry can do its part to continue to create jobs and lead the economy forward, but we need Congress and the Trump administration to address skyrocketing lumber prices and shortages. What will you do about lumber prices and shortages?
Big driver right now in the housing market are the historically low mortgage rates, and that has been a bit of a bright spot. There are other issues that are not as bright. Aerospace and aviation employment, for instance, and manufacturing generally is not a bright spot. But I don't know that relying on housing construction is going to lead the economy. I think you just need to address it as it is, and in part that has to do with lumber prices. So I just have, some notes. On August 24th, the WTO ruled that U.S. duties that have been designed to counter Canadian subsidies actually breached global trading rules because the U.S. failed to prove that prices paid by Canadian firms for timber on government lands were artificially low. I mean, I just oppose punitive tariffs generally, and especially on Americans' allies and strongest trade partners, read Canada, which is a large producer of softwood lumber. So whoever asked that question, please call my office. I'd love to understand your particular position so that we can continue to work on this, probably as a part of a larger trade issue. I would note, before shutting my yapper, I would note it makes it hard right now for us to make cases like this when the U.S. is slapping tariffs on Canadian aluminum when the problem is Chinese aluminum. It makes it hard when we are threatening additional steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada. And this administration's trade policy is a disaster. And so I don't know that this administration is really the right administration to look towards for a solution.
I just wanted to add something on the housing conversation, and Rick mentioned a little bit earlier, affordable housing. I've been working on the affordable housing tax credit enhancement myself in the House, and Senator Cantwell leads the effort in the Senate, and it's been hugely bipartisan. We've seen a lot of projects fall apart because some of the affordable housing tax credit policy is not providing the same amount of resources it normally would. So there's a 4% credit that folks use in conjunction with when they have tax exempt bonds that are part of a low-income housing project development. That 4% tax credit actually is about 3% right now because of interest rates being low. So policy, and it's included in the Invest in America Act that Rick was talking about, part of our bill, would put a minimum 4% in there, which would help many projects even in our state, get off the ground. So when we want to talk about the need to address affordable housing, things like that are important policy, and it's strongly bipartisan. We have a majority of members of the House on the standalone bill, Republicans and Democrats. So those are places where we can address other barriers to affordable housing development in our communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I know us as an organization, for anyone that's interested, we have our policy agenda on our website, bellingham.com. And when we look at special initiatives facing the Bellingham region, which generally, let's say Whatcom County, housing affordability and availability and childcare are two things that even before COVID and after COVID, we will have to address. And so I appreciate both of you working on these issues on a federal level, even though some of this will probably be definitely needed to be handled on a state and local level as well. So it's going to take everyone moving in the same direction. So next up, we have Ray Deck from Skookum Kids is asking a question. Could you speak to the state of play on the next round of COVID relief, and specifically a renewal of the PPP? The most recent draft I heard would require recipients to demonstrate a 50% loss of revenue and would make organizations like Skookum Kids, which has seen some but not that much decline in revenue, but a huge increase in expenditures, ineligible for that round. And I would kind of expand on that question, even though it is implied, assuming the PPP is extended to those that have already received PPP once before.
Yeah, Susan?
I was going to say, go ahead. I can follow up.
All right. So the HEROES Act did extend the PPP. I would take with a grain of salt any draft you hear about right now. There are just a lot of moving parts. The PPP program ended in terms of being authorized on August 8th, but there's still about $100 billion available, but we can't spend it because it's the program's not authorized. So there's a threshold question about whether to reauthorize it. The feedback I've received from my visits is yes, you should reauthorize it. The second set of questions then has to do with who should be eligible, and obviously the choices are any eligible company or business or nonprofit that did not yet receive one, or do you allow companies to do a second round? That's another question. There's a question about forgivability, whether or not to do an automatic forgiveness of $150,000 or less. So if you had had a loan for $200,000, the first $150,000 would be forgiven. That's a threshold question as well. So the point I'm making is listening to rumors about PPP is like getting news from Twitter right now. So my advice to you is whatever your position is, communicate that to us, and so that we know what it is, so we can pass that on to the negotiators. That would be the best advice I have for you, rather than just chase rumors, because you should not plan on rumors. You should plan on what actually happens.
I wanted to add that a big jobs package in the HEROES Act was the Employee Retention Tax Credit expansion. So it was designed to work in conjunction with Paycheck Protection Program. So if you've used the Paycheck Protection Program, you can also use the Employee Retention Tax Credit. It's a program that was put in place in the CARES Act in a much smaller scale. And what we do in the HEROES Act is we expand the Employee Retention Tax Credit so that you would be able to get up to an 80% credit to cover up to $15,000 of qualified wages a quarter. So 80% of $15,000 per quarter. The way it's set up would be for 3 quarters, it would cover up to $36,000 of wages per employee for this calendar year. It works directly with the IRS, so you do not go to a lender, and it's a refundable tax credit. So the way it's set is you would, if you owe money to the IRS would calculate your credit for that time period. You'd kind of net it out right there. If you owed a little bit more to the IRS, you'd pay that. If they owed you, they'd give you the extra money from the credit to keep people on the payroll. There's also a portion of this that also would cover overhead expenses, which is similar to what's in Paycheck Protection. You can't use both programs to cover the same wages over the same period of time. You can't double dip, but if you were using Paycheck Protection, you could then use the Employee Retention Tax Credit. I say that because it kicks in at a 10% revenue loss and then goes up from there. Once again, it's not a forgivability issue because the tax credit's there, you get it, and it's done. And it's timely, because people think of tax credits as something that come at the end of the year, but this is something that would happen right away. So strongly bipartisan, and be hugely helpful if we can get a relief package moving forward, and would also help address some of the needs that you're talking about in your question.
Yeah. Hey, Guy, I have a question for Susan, and she can answer this because she's the expert on the Employee Retention Tax Credit. You can't use them simultaneously, but if you still have an outstanding loan, outstanding PPP that you've already used up but haven't been forgiven yet, can you use the ERTC?
You just cannot use them to cover the same wages over the same period of time. But if you use PPP for one period of time, you can then turn and use Employee Retention Tax Credit. So you can use, it used to be in the CARES Act, you couldn't use both. If you used one, you couldn't use the other. We set it up in the HEROES Act so that you cover wages over a period of time under PPP. When your PPP is done, you can move and use ERTC. They just can't overlap.
And that's in the HEROES Act, and we need the Senate to act on that.
Yes.
Great.
And it's bipartisan, which is important to remind everyone.
Got it.
Hey, I learned something today.
go. Well, and you know, if you wanted to include 501c6 organizations in PPP, I would gladly accept it. And I know
I've never heard that from you.
ever, or any other local chamber for that matter in either of your districts. So, as well as the DMO, I'm going to speak on behalf of my friends with the Tourism Bureau too. The next question is involved with childcare. And so childcare is very important for people and businesses to get back to as close to normal. Is this issue included in any of the bills passed in the House?
I can answer that. I actually just got off a call with a lot of our child care providers, including some folks in Whatcom County right before this call. There are actually 2 bills that we've passed in the House to try to help a lot of our providers and just help families. 2 particular pieces were the Child Care is Essential Act. It would be a bill that would provide grant funding to child care providers to help stabilize the child care sector. So many folks are struggling with, there's still a huge need for child care, but also folks aren't sending their children in person always to child care. So that's created a lot of problems. So this would support providers, help them to safely reopen and operate. And there's also the Child Care for Economic Recovery Act. Those are 2 bills that we've worked on that have that passed in the House. Then separately, we have an enhanced child tax credit that is part of the HEROES Act. Really something that is hugely important in terms of helping reduce child poverty across the country. And just like I was talking about the employee retention tax credit, the child tax credit gets dollars into the hands of families to help them with expenses. So the child tax credit expansion, another one that I've led with Rosa DeLaura in the House, is in the HEROES Act. The other legislation, the Child Care is Essential Act and the Child Care for Economic Recovery Act, also separate pieces of legislation that have passed the House. We're trying to get moving in the Senate.
Awesome. Anything to add, Rick?
No, just to thank Whatcom County government for using some of the CARES Act money that we approved that was passed through Whatcom County to help fund some child care efforts in Whatcom County as well.
And we're excited as the chamber, we're partnering with Opportunity Council in the creation of the Northwest Child Care Expansion Center, which will be housed at the chamber. And so we're working on it prior to COVID and still working on it, but excited to see that progress over the next few months. So what looks to be the final question, so I want to be respectful of both of your time, so we'll make this one the final question. During the Republican National Convention, there were several blatant violations of the Hatch Act. It seems unlikely that anyone will face accountability for that. How would you reform that regulation to make it more enforceable?
Well, it's not a regulation, it's a law. And so it's in law, and with any law, it needs to be, someone needs to take an action to enforce it. And so I don't know that Congress has a standing to do that. I'd have to look back on that. But I would agree they're violations, but I can only allege that. And but we should not. Susan and I can't even, and we shouldn't. We can't use taxpayer-funded resources for campaigns. We can't. That's against the federal election law. Now we don't. The Hatch Act doesn't apply to us in this regard, but a lot of other things do apply to us to prevent us from doing that. And the Hatch Act exists to protect. It doesn't exist to protect the president or any president. It exists to protect federal employees from being forced to do campaign work, so they can continue to be civil servants and public servants. So, but I will say we have since the questioner asked, and I won't presume the politics of anyone listening on this call, we do have a very important accountability mechanism facing us in the next 60 plus days. And people can hold, in my view, could hold the president accountable very clearly on election day, if not 3 weeks out when you get your mail-in ballots. But that's probably another conversation for another time.
Can I just add that This also highlights how critically important it is that we have strong congressional oversight, that our role, it's our constitutional role. We are a co-equal branch of government. And so making sure that the House and the Senate are doing their responsibility of bringing the administration in on all issues. I'm talking broadly now on where things stand, how federal dollars are being used, how programs are being implemented, what's working, what's not working. That transparency is critically important for us to do our jobs. And so I do think that while we continue to do a lot of work in the House, I do think that it's incumbent upon the House and the Senate to make sure that we have strong oversight so that there continues to be accountability to the public for actions that the administration takes.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so very much for joining us today. I do want to...
I have one more point I want to make.
Sure.
Whatcom County's self-response rate for the U.S. Census is 72.1%. That's higher than the state self-response. So this is people in Whatcom County responded by internet, or they sent their questionnaire in, or they called it in. And statewide, when you combine the total response, self-response, with the census workers now going door to door or calling people, we're at about 92.5% statewide for total response. So if you haven't responded to the census, please respond to the census. If you know someone who hasn't, please help them get in contact with mycensus2020.gov. And there's a phone number there too. You can call and fill out the census. We don't do earmarks anymore. We can't do earmarks anymore, but the census will help define the federal dollars that help come and support our schools, our roads, our affordable housing needs, any number of things. I look at the census as a 10-year earmark. Mm-hmm. If we can get a high number, we're going to be better off over the next decade in accessing federal dollars. So please, great job, Whatcom County. You're beating the state number, but we still have a little ways to go. Please help out and fill out the census.
Completely agree with you. And our partners at the Whatcom Community Foundation and Council of Governments are doing a great job on a local level to make sure that everyone in Whatcom County is counted. So that's certainly important. So thanks for that. Thanks for that additional plug. I also want to say thank you for mentioning the systemic racism that our country is facing right now. We were engaged, or started to engage, in a little bit of that work late last year and early this year, and clearly COVID happened. And so it's certainly something that's important to us as an organization, but I think speaks to the identity of Whatcom County as well. And so I appreciate both mentioning that to some level, because it is important work that we've got to get right. So we're probably adding that to those strategic initiatives like housing and childcare and DEI that speak to the needs of our community. A lot of this conversation has engaged with, and clearly as we knew it would, the PPP and other federal projects and programs. I would be amiss if I did not acknowledge the SBDC and CJ, who's actually, I believe she's one of our participants and one of our attendees today. They are doing a great job with outreach and connection with our small businesses that need access to all the programs, even though PPP is run through the financial institutions. So again, thanks to the hard work that CJ is doing along with her team at the SBDC. Make sure I get to all of my thank yous. Again, I want to thank Jen and Morgan. They are attending the meetings when both of you aren't available, and this would not be possible without both of them. And so even though their cameras are off, we know they're still, so it's important. And just to say thank you. And thank you, both of you. You've given us almost 50 minutes of your time in your very busy schedule. So we appreciate the work that you do on behalf of Whatcom County, both residents and businesses alike. And so we also want to thank Pam with BP for being our series sponsor. And so unless either of you have any final comments, I would just say thank you.
Thanks, Guy, and everyone, please stay safe and stay healthy.
Wear your masks,
Wear your mask, wash your hands.
right? So thank you both, and thanks for everybody for joining the call today.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.